I'm Helena.
I'm Lizzie.
And we're sisters entering the second half of life, which is a polite way of saying old.
Well, 40s are the new 30s actually, but with more wisdom and wrinkles, but carry on.
We've come together to create Flock Hive for those, like us, embarking on a new phase of personal growth and learning for our second act. And this basically means shaking off old beliefs and asking a lot of questions, and generally being up for a bit of healing.
And this project is about reminding ourselves to appreciate the simple, everyday things we already have, as well as taking a deep dive into big subjects about what it is to be human.
And because we're not experts, we'll be joined every week by people who are. Hooray! And we'll be chatting to them about everything from how smelling practice can stave off dementia, to somatic sex therapy, the medicinal power of mushrooms, and much more.
Should we take mushrooms and record an episode?
What if we did? Join us on our learning journey, and we hope to bring you some joy along the way.
Did you just say learny journey?
What's wrong with learning journey? Well, here we are, episode 1. It's nice to see your face and hear your voice.
Hello.
Hi.
It's a virtual face.
Well, it's not just us, though, is it? Because every week we're going to be bringing on a new expert guest. And this week it's going to be Professor Barry Smith, and he'll be talking all about the interconnectedness of our senses. But before we get stuck into that, given that it's episode 1, shall we say a little bit about us, who we are and why we're here?
Yeah, I'm Lizzie. I'm an artist, a mum of 3. I've had quite a few different hats across my career, but I'm just emerging from a decade of largely stay-at-home mumming with the odd exhibition and commission here and there.
I'm Helena. I'm actually a drinks writer and broadcaster. So I've been on quite a different journey to you, although I do have 2 young kids as well. But I guess what's interesting is that we do share an upbringing, but we've had quite different experiences of that. And a big reason that we are both here today, isn't it, is because we feel that we are very much on a similar journey.
We're both really fucked up.
This is essentially therapy.
Yeah. We've had we've had the same upbringing essentially, but a different reaction to it. But then have come to a point in our lives where most women do in their early to mid 40s, start to pick apart what's working, what's not working, wanting to discover new things, wanting to unlearn some of the stuff that's sort of keeping us stuck.
It's also when you've got small children, you're going, hang on a minute, do I really want to instill in them the things that I was brought up with? Because actually, when we think about them, some of it is absolute tush.
Well, it's 90s as well. Like, I've seen so many memes recently about what would happen in the 90s, what they got away with. Even yesterday, we were watching 3 Men and a Baby, and the baby's naked in it, like full on little girl, full frontal, like quite a lot of the time.
Kids didn't have seat belts in cars. Babies had no seat belts in that film. Oh my goodness. Crazy.
And they were going to put it in the trunk.
I think there are a lot of women our age, particularly, and it is a female thing, who are starting to question how they were brought up, especially when they've got young kids. And for us as well, we are, I'd like to think, quite naturally spiritual people, we should say. But our upbringing really, really wasn't. It was very black and white medical, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, our dad was a doctor and our mum was a nurse. Where it wasn't a strict upbringing and it wasn't restrictive, and our desire to be creative in any way was never pushed down, it still wasn't really, I don't think, valued.
I've had a lot of therapy about the fact that I didn't want to go into a very black and white career, the fact that I'm a creative, having been told, as you say, that everything I loved and valued was just a hobby.
But it wasn't just our parents' influence, was it? It was very much the culture of the time, which looking back was a complete shit show, the 80s and the 90s. Plus our school as well, would have a big, effect on our upbringing.
Yeah, huge, because they encourage us to do all this creative stuff. But then when it came to careers, it's like, oh, no. That was just to get you into university.
Yes.
That was just for your UCAS form. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, totally.
But that's why it's lovely to actually be in a position where we can unlearn certain limitations, I think we should say, and also do something that we would never did. In fact, it was quite the opposite when we were younger, which was look for positive things in absolutely everything we can find. Because I guess what we are learning is that the more you look for positive stuff, the more you see. And that is one surefire way to happiness. So we're going to be doing a lot of that in this, aren't we?
I'm not convinced I can be that positive person, but I do believe it though. I believe it because I've seen snippets.
So we're going to be kicking each other's butts about that. There is that lovely new expression, or that expression we've heard recently, which is glimmer, essentially the opposite of a trigger. And that's just trying to hold on to that kind of positive moment that you just capture. You must have noticed, and I think part of the reason we're here is because since the pandemic, I think humanity, we're looking for something else a little bit deeper. Why are we spending our lives doing jobs we hate to earn money to buy things we don't need? What if it were actually much simpler? I mean, look at the world around us, look at the animals, look at the natural world. They all know how to function and no one's told them how to do anything.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. The natural world is thriving, and when we get back to ourselves, I think we thrive as well.
Mm.
And the example is just people, like any kind of generosity or the coming together of any goodwill movement that was heightened was the upside of lockdown. Quite a few people probably shed a lot of negativity because they were like, that was a traumatic experience, but look what I grew from it, and it's completely on a different path to where I thought I was going. But that's giving into, for want of a better word, fate or destiny.
Yeah, and the whole mindset shift that I think many people experienced after lockdown also makes me think of a word that we've learnt since then, actually, and that's Ikigai. Can you explain it?
Um, it's a Japanese word that translates to your soul's purpose. And it's broken down into 4 elements. And they are doing what you love, doing what the world needs from you, particularly, doing what makes you money and what you can get paid for, and doing what you're good at.
Mm.
And I find this fascinating because at the ripe old age of 42, I've had many different careers in different industries. And in each time, each juncture, I've really been convinced that that's my purpose, my destiny. But I don't think I've ever really taken into fact that probably all 4 of those things need to be in balance. And one of those things, particularly as a creative, is the money side. Money has always been a bit icky to talk about. It's a bit taboo. It's rude to ask to sort of talk about money. That's definitely the upbringing we had. And as a creative who's being commissioned, it's very difficult to ask for money. And my husband has a go at me because for quite a while I would give away paintings because I'm like, can't possibly ask for money. But that's a really important side of it too, because if you want to flourish with your soul's purpose, you need money, and it's only going to be legitimate if you can live off that.
Another thing that blew my mind yesterday that I heard, which is kind of related, it's related to values. And that's if there is something about a person that really, really irks you, chances are it's showing you what your most closely guarded value is. So it's worth
Yeah.
listening to that. And that can, I think, could be a good place to start with all of this and finding your Ikigai. There is a wonderful little book that I found in Oliver Bonus. It's called, Ikigai, The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life. And it's by Hector Garcia and Francesc, I think that's how you pronounce it, Mirales. And it's really lovely. It's a really easy read.
Is your house currently as full as your bedroom was growing up of those little book of dot dot dots, little book of The Alchemist reduced down in a little book of The Alchemist?
Oi! No, I read the whole of The Alchemist, actually. In answer to your question, my house is currently, yes, you are correct, absolutely full of those little books from Oliver Bonus and TK Maxx.
They're always at the till, aren't they?
I'm writing my wine version of that one. Just you wait. Manifest, manifest.
If you manifest it, it will come.
Anyway, I think it's time we stop waffling on about things we don't really understand and speak to somebody who does actually make some sense, don't you?
I think it's time, yes.
So, this is the chat we had with Professor Barry Smith, who is a genius, and it's all about how our senses interact and how we can use this knowledge to improve all sorts of things about our lives. And he's the perfect first guest here because we're starting from a more black and white place of science, but he's opening the door to thinking differently about how our bodies and our minds work. Here's what he had to say.
I'm Barry Smith. I'm a professor of philosophy, but I also do sensory science. If people ask me what I am, I say I'm a bird that's becoming a plane, really. So I'm moving more and more into the science side. And I'm the director of the Centre for the Study of the Senses here at the University of London. And we have 2 working labs where we work with neuroscientists and psychologists to work on how our senses work. But we also work with chefs and perfumers and artists and filmmakers and museums and galleries. So it's exciting. There's a lot to do.
There are more than 5 senses as well, though, aren't there?
There were two things that my neuroscience colleagues taught me that made me think, right, we have to start from the beginning. One is we have many more senses than 5. And if you ask them how many, they'll say anywhere between 22 and 33. So that's a big shock to most people.
Yeah.
The other thing they tell us is the senses don't work independently of each other. There's a lot of crosstalk. They're always influencing each other's workings.
So you're looking very much at the interconnectedness of all the senses. And I know in the
Yes.
past we've talked about cross-modalism, but also synesthesia. Can you just briefly explain what those two things are and why they're different?
Yes, we can do that. Cross-modal influence is where the sound or the feel of something might change how you perceive its taste. You might make something taste sweeter or more sour by listening to a sound as you're eating. Now, there, it's not as though you've produced some third thing. You're just having an influence on how one of the senses is behaving in the light of another sense. And then synesthesia is actually where you've got associations between two senses. So quite often people will read letters and or hear words, and they think they've got colors. So they'll maybe think the name Helena is orange, and somebody else will say, no, it's blue. And it's very individual what associations you have between sounds and colors or letters and colors. But cross-modal influences of one sense on another, they tend to be standard across all people. So for example, when we talk about the pitch of sound, we talk about high pitch and low pitch. But what makes it high? It's just a different sound, but it's very natural to associate a height with that high note. And then think also of smells. When you're smelling the smell of menthol, we say, oh, that's a high note. And the smell of leather or musk is a low note. Again, that's quite natural, but it's not as idiosyncratic as synesthesia. We all do it. And my favorite is if you ask people to say, you have to put lemons on a scale between fast and slow. Where are lemons? And everybody says,
Fast.
fast. Right.
But why?
Banana,
Definitely
slow.
so. Yeah.
Absolutely, right. And that's shared, and that's going to be shared across the world. So it's not to do with idiosyncrasies, individual difference, and it's not cultural. So we like to find out which influences on our senses are to do with our culture and maybe our cuisine and how we grew up, and which are, as it were, wired into us. But they're not wired in that individual way that synesthesia is. We all share them.
But there must be huge implications with this. You talked about what I've seen described as sonic seasoning. When you listen to a high pitch of something and it might negate the need for sugar in your coffee, for example. And there must be many kind of lifestyle areas where you can make tweaks based on sound.
Yes.
I know you've worked a lot with Charles Spence as well, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, Heston Blumenthal, and lots of people like that. Can you give us some more examples of how small tweaks to our environments
Yes, absolutely. So Charles and I used to do the sort of dog and pony show where we would give people wines to taste, and then we would play sounds and say, does it change the way the taste of the wine appears? And they'd say yes. So one thing is you give them a Sauvignon Blanc and you say, now concentrate on the acidity or the sourness. You got that? Yeah. Now I want you to sip again, but we're going to play this very high-pitched violin note. You hear this, and you see people's jaw go like that. And they go, ooh, it's very sour. And then you say, okay, let's see if we can sweeten it. And then you have some nice, gentle, tinkling piano music, and they have it, and they go, oh, that's much better. Now, Charles says that's sonic seasoning, and I love the phrase, but I don't quite think that could work because that looks like magic. So what I think is happening is the wine has both sweetness and sourness in it. And because we've got these cross-modal associations between sourness and high-pitched sort of violin note, and between sweetness and something much more mellow as a note, you're just directing someone's attention to that part of the wine. And of course, if you attend to the sourness, you're not attending to the other things. So you're bringing that into view and dropping the rest. So that's one.
I imagine that colour psychology comes into this quite a lot.
Yes. Again, lovely work done by Charles Spence, where he was giving people these colored liquids to drink. And some of them were lime green, some of them were, deep red, some of them were yellow, and so on. And he said they may or may not have any flavor. In fact, they were tasteless dyes in water, so they didn't really have flavor. But everybody who tried them was convinced that the lime green was quite sour and the bright red was actually sweeter. And so again, we've got those natural associations from nature between redness for ripeness and greenness for, unripe and sour. And if you roll those out, you can give people the right expectations and the right associations, sensory congruence.
I guess it goes much further than fun experiments that we can do with food and wine. I'm thinking of brain disorders like Alzheimer's or
Yes.
dementia.
Yes.
Can playing with our senses help there?
With most people who are aging, it's a very slow decline. And you'll notice, we all know this with our older relatives, that they say, oh, the food doesn't taste as good as it used to, and they'll probably add more salt to it. That's because they're not getting that hit of smell. But it's interesting that loss of smell, where it's not diagnosed, it's not due to a virus, it's not due to head injury, can often be a 2 to 4 year advance warning of the onset of Parkinson's disease or dementia. So when it's an idiopathic smell loss, it can sometimes mean you should have explored and have investigated whether it's Parkinson's or whether this is the start of dementia. That's an indication of neurodegeneration. It's like the canary in the cage. It's almost telling you ahead of time. So this is why medics now are beginning to pay more attention when patients turn up and say, I've lost my sense of smell. Previously, medics had the same view of it as most of the public do, that it was irrelevant. They'd say, oh, can you see, can you hear, can you stand upright? You're fine. It doesn't matter. But of course, it matters mightily. And the quality of life changes. Not only do you feel cut off from the world around you when you lose your sense of smell, and are you unable to enjoy so much pleasure from your food that flavors are reduced to just tastes and feel in the mouth, but intimacy is affected when you can't smell the smell of your partner, when you can't smell the smell of your children, when your own home is not familiar and easily kind of recognized. Let me dwell on that a bit. It's an interesting fact that, to show you how little attention we pay to smell, most of us think our own home doesn't have a smell. And that's funny because everybody else's home's got a smell. You go and visit your friends and your neighbors and you can smell their houses, but you kind of don't know what the smell of your home is like. And that's because you've got so used to it, you're not paying attention. The brain thinks, I've got this. I don't need to keep recreating it. But when people lose their sense of smell, they often say, I feel alienated from my own home. It doesn't feel like my own home. So that shows that even though they weren't consciously attending to it, in some sense, our sense of smell was registering and the brain was registering it's familiar, everything is okay. So all of that gets disrupted with smell loss too.
Can you train your sense of smell? Is there anything that you can do that will help stave off something like Parkinson's or dementia by practicing smelling, for example?
Well, I don't think it'll stave off anything which is coming from elsewhere. So neurological diseases, and we still don't know what the origin of Parkinson's is. Some people think, interestingly, and this is, I think, probably the leading hypothesis, that it's due to the leaky gut. So when people have bacteria in their gut that are good, but when they have irritable bowel and those bacteria that were so good in the gut leak out of the gut, and irritate the walls, when they get into the bloodstream and get to the brain, there may be a poisoning that goes on, and that leads to Parkinson's. So that's the leading view. But you can stave off, I think, dementia, and you can stave off a little bit of deterioration in your senses by doing smell training. So smell training is now proven to be better at maintaining and in fact boosting your sense of smell. So what do? Well, you take 4 essential oils, and the classic 4 are lemon, eucalyptus, clove, and rose, but they could really be any 4 odors. These belong to different categories, so they're interesting. You sniff them last thing at night, first thing in the morning, and have a good old sniff. And you can even mix them up and don't look, and then decide, yes, that's eucalyptus, that's clove. And there's a very nice study done by Thomas Hummel and his colleagues in Dresden, where they took a group of 70-year-olds And they split them in two, and one group did Sudoku for 3 months, and the other did smell training for 3 months. Now, after they came back and tested them, the Sudoku people were, of course, better at Sudoku, but they showed no other cognitive improvements. Whereas the people who did smell training had cognitive improvement and were better and quicker at remembering names of objects and doing naming tasks and recalling words. So we all know we forget people's names and it's very difficult. We have to sort of struggle to bring them back, and that gets worse. But it turns out that smell training is actually going to keep you cognitively more active. So we should all be doing this. It's a use it or lose it sense. And you're very lucky, Helena, because you're a wine professional. And anybody who's using their nose in this way, either in the wine world or in perfume or in coffee, they are actually actively using their sense of smell, and they will have improved and developed the sense of smell well beyond their ordinary capacity. And it's a funny sense because you can't really improve your eyesight, you can't really improve your hearing, whereas you can with your sense of smell. And that's because it's sort of dormant, it's there and not used. But if you actively use it, we know that you improve and increase some of the white matter in the brain that's actually dedicated to paying attention to smell. So you'll be fine.
Is the amount of alcohol consumed going to negate all of that?
That's right. It swings and roundabouts. Absolutely.
Well, with that in mind, I think our next meeting should be in person over a glass of wine.
I think so. With pleasure.
Professor Barry Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So, thoughts on that? Mind blown at all?
I mean, I've always known that we are more than just like the 5 mechanical senses, and there's loads of things run much deeper, but not to that level where we can kind of change our experience of things. I mean, that is interesting. But my favourite point was that you can improve your sense of smell, and you can't with your eyesight or your hearing, and that's something you can exercise. I don't really do that, but you must be an Olympian at it with your job.
Yeah, I know, right? I mean, that was very exciting for me because obviously there are a lot of negative things that get associated with wine tasting. But I did do an experiment like that once because I'd heard about this before from chats with Barry in the past. And I gave a group of people the same wine. It was exactly the same wine, same temperature, same bottle. And I played music A for the first tasting, which was the very high pitched thing, and then music B with the bass notes, and they absolutely gave me completely different tasting notes for both.
But you did tell them that that's what you'd done eventually.
Oh yeah, I told them it was an experiment, and they all went, "Oh," and thought I was very, very clever.
Even though it's Barry's experiment. Isn't there an element of hoodwinking and subliminal messaging going on, which I've always thought has, you're a bit vulnerable with that.
Yeah, of course, but that's literally the point. It's to show how subjective our senses are and how easily they can be manipulated according to what you're looking at, according to what you're touching, and according what you're listening to.
And we probably don't even know ourselves how we're reacting to things most of the time.
No, exactly. And it makes me think of more work that Barry's done with Charles Spence. Charles particularly has spoken a lot about something called sensation transference, and that is, for example, why Provençal rosé tastes better on holiday but rubbish when you get it home to your rainy kitchen. It's all about set and setting, and that really influences what you're tasting.
But what I'm getting here and what I'm quite excited about is that it's not just about taste and smell in terms of food and experiencing that, is it? Like you can manipulate other experiences through using a combination of different senses.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. So a lot of it is coming from food and drink. Well, it is in my mind because that's my world. I do get these press releases. And a recent one was about how a tequila brand called Maestro Dobel had been working with Charles Spence. And they'd done a study where the conclusion was that watching Succession can make you a better wine and spirits taster, because the idea is that you're watching a very fast-paced, very talky TV show, and that gets all your juices going and it fires you all up. And so then if you were to taste something afterwards, suddenly you're a lot more articulate about it. So you might have just said, "Oh, taste of booze" before. You might be able to do paragraphs and paragraphs of tasting notes.
And also the tasting notes would be very sweary. Fuck off.
Yes, you're probably right. That's probably why they're longer, because 90% of the words are actually swear words.
Very spicy. So it sounds like what you were saying is you can squeeze your brain into like that channel of thinking. So you can almost change your ability if you trigger it and peak it with something like that, like you said, really fast paced, really cerebral. You have to really follow that storyline quite closely. And it's quite cutting and it's exciting and thrilling. But do you know what? This is me being weird. Talking about absorbing an experience and it really changes your physiology and your senses. I remember when we were younger, if we saw Les Mis at the theatre, I was Cosette for a week after. Everything had this hue of performance, and I had been really affected by it, and I'd really absorbed it. Is it just me?
No, it is not just you. I do that too. And in fact, I think it's very, very much a human thing. I think we all do it. Do we? She said, we're talking in an echo chamber here. But I I definitely used to do that with Downton Abbey. In fact, my husband, Hamish, you've met him before. He used to get really annoyed with me because after every episode of Downton Abbey, I would become Lady Mary. And everything would be seen through a Downton Abbey lens after that.
Yes, lens. That's exactly it. You can shift your view of the world with this, with all of this cross-modalism, can't you?
Exactly.
And when Barry talks about that experiment he did to enhance the sourness of a glass of wine by playing a high-pitched noise, that's exciting because the sweetness is still there, isn't it? You haven't actually got rid of it. You're just not noticing it anymore. And that's why I'm really excited about how you can manipulate a stressful situation for yourself by tweaking or peaking a sense that's sort of rumbling underneath and actually changing your experience of something without the need for, medication, alcohol. I'm talking social anxieties here. You can manage. Kind of reminds me of CBT. Could this be used to treat depression and panic disorder? So if you're in a stressful situation, that you can alter your response, you could halt the onslaught of cortisol. It's kind of almost like a bit like hypnosis too.
Like a sensory CBT kit that you develop. So if you're struggling, you've got various things in your toolkit that you can pull out to use that aren't taking drugs or similar.
Exactly. It's about knowing your body again, isn't it? It's about knowing how to use it. Because I think nowadays we're all so up in our heads and we're not grounded really or connected and kind of focusing on the other and not ourselves, which is why that colour experiment was really nice, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was proof that we take all our information like that from nature without even knowing about it. So we are constantly connected and interacting with nature. And we forget that. Yeah, everything we need, we actually already have.
That's it. That is the lovely, simple message, isn't it? That we've overthought humanity and actually everything is already there. And that's why I think this is such a lovely conversation to start with on the Flock and Hive podcast, because it's all about just trying to get back to what we've already got, that we've just forgotten how to use. Can someone please develop a human toolkit and roll it out to all schools? Because I think if we'd all had something like that age 7, we'd be a lot less bonkers, wouldn't we?
My God, yes.
There is still so much to talk about, I think, here, isn't there? But it's probably a good time to wrap up episode 1 of this podcast. But for those interested, there are lots more articles over on our website that take a much deeper dive into these subjects. So head over there at flockandhive.com.
And follow us at Flock and Hive on all the socials. And if you're an expert who wants to come and talk to us, we would love to have you on. Or if you want to suggest someone, please get in touch.
And next week, we'll be joined by feng shui expert Christina Hollinger. So until then, ta-ta!
Bye.